Alrighty, well hey gang, welcome back. Well, we're going to go through the tiny house cook stove brickwork slideshow here, and I'm just going to talk you through it and cover some of the stuff, information about the build that will be helpful. So start with your layout. In this case I'm going to have a bench, and I'm checking level, and my area is not level at all. So the first thing you want to do is get yourself level. So in this case you can see I've got a shim there on the low side and a level, and I'm infilling. In this case I just used some clay sand gravel mix, and then I'm putting insulated fire brick down on top of my leveling pad, and that's because of course I'm on a wood floor. So if you're not on a wood floor, you can go ahead and just use red brick here, and it doesn't need to be solid if you're using red brick. In the case of the insulating fire brick, I wanted to make it solid because it's much more insulative of a material than the mortar would be. So level that, level your layer, and go ahead and get that set in some thin mortar. Now for the mortar, I'm using Mason sand and fire clay. I use Lincoln 60 fire clay, and I use it at a ratio of about 3:1 by dry volume. So that's 3 scoops of sand, 1 scoop of fire clay. If you like, you can add a little screened ash from your fireplace in there to make it kick off and harden a little faster, but all you really need is the clay and sand. Okay, so here we go. I did the first layer of hard red brick. You can see I set them in the clay sand mortar, and then I infilled the gaps, and now here we are on to layer 1. Now the light's pretty bad in here, so I did try and take photos from a lot of different angles. Should give you a pretty good idea of what's going on. Now level, side to side, corner to corner, especially as you get going, real important. Now if you are going to add a bench, you can follow along with what I did here, or get an idea of what you might do. Now in this section here where that bucket is sitting, we're going to eventually put some supports there. You can see them now for the next layer to support the bridge between the downdraft chamber and the oven. So I didn't show it very well, but I just used some small cut bricks there, and I used those on edge to create those supports. You could start from the beginning and build up to there. And now here we're above the oven. Now I used a rock for my header. You can also use angle iron, like an old bed frame, works great. One way to do it is to bolt an entire frame together, all 4 sides, and put that in the opening. That'll give you something to mount the door flange to, if you choose to mount the door that way. It also creates the header for your bricks, and then you can put the bricks across the top. If you don't choose to do a whole frame, you can just put a single piece of angle iron across any of those gaps and use that as a header. So here I am on to layer 5, where I'm about to set the metal sheet, and you can see I've inset my bricks by about 1/2 inch. Now I did that just as a little detail. In my final stove I put some decorative masonry in there. And if you like, you can do that. It's nice to have a little waste in the stove, and it's nice to have little protrusions as well at the bottom and top. It gives it just a little more body and detail. So here I am setting the, I'm working back there on the exhaust I think, but there's the firebox support, the metal sheet. If you can, wait until this point until you cut it, because your dimensions might be a little bit different than mine depending on how your brickwork goes. But all you do is just set that in thin mortar, and then go right ahead and start moving on to layer 6 right over the top of that. So because of that inset, when I set the next layer of bricks, they're kind of hanging out in space. So I use those other bricks as weights to hold them in place while the mortar's set. And again, then I'm leveling as I go. Now I'm up to the firebox door opening, and you'll see I use a firebox door flange to size that opening. Now the flange is not the one that I end up using in the final build, so it doesn't look like the one in your plans if you have those. But it is the same outside dimensions. So if you have your flange pre-cut, you can size it to the opening, or you can do that the other way around and size your flange to your brickwork. Again, another option there would be to frame that in with angle iron bed frame. I made my header with stone again because I had some, but angle iron is a great way to span any of those gaps. You'll see my exhaust is a little pinched at this point. It's because I was a little closer to the wall than my plans dictated. So my build does differ a little bit from the plans if you're referring to those while you look at these. And again, you can see my bench coming together there and how I incorporated that. So you can see my rock headers there above the oven, and there's the flange sizing the firebox where the core opening. Also at this time I've got the exhaust collar in place, starting to size that as well. And it's about ready for the core. So now I've got my core placed in there. You can use clay and sand around the sides of the core and take up any slop, and you can also seal any edges that you see there are gaps using that clay sand. Now here in the front you may need to use a little fiberboard, ceramic fiberboard, to make additional shims that infill between your door flange and the face of your core. In my case I set the door flange out and I actually ended up using 2 inches of material there. It creates a nice little insulative barrier between the firebox and the face of the stove, so it keeps it cool and it gives you a little bit more depth to reach material in there. But depending on your door, you may want to set the flange all the way back against the core and keep things flush. It's up to you, but that's how you can infill that space. And now it's time to set the top on top of the core and just get an idea how things are going to come together, get your spacing, and then you can start to work out your perimeter or trim, depending on how you're going to do the top. Now in this case, again, I use the bricks, and you'll see as we move on in the photos here, I ended up marking, you can see the pencil there, you lay the glass on top of your bricks. I marked the glass on the bricks, where the glass landed on the bricks, and then I inset the glass into the bricks. I took the bricks outside one by one and used the angle grinder to let the glass in by about, I reduced them by about 1/2 inch. Oh no, I used the wet saw, the tile saw, excuse me, and I cut about 1/2 inch into them so I could infill with mortar and set the top in mortar. Now you don't need to do that everywhere, but right over the downdraft chamber in particular, you need to carry the glass top. On the far side over the core can carry most of it. So there's what I'm talking about. You can see my reveal there for the glass top to set into, and a little bit of angle grinder work on the corners. And then here is the bypass and the exhaust. We'll go more into that in a later video, but you can see the brickwork there. As I set the exhaust, I actually cut a small dado into those bricks and I slid that exhaust flange into those bricks into a slot. So there's the top layout. I added that centerpiece to create the serpentine. You can see the bypass there. There's a thin piece of ceramic fiberboard creating the ceiling over the tunnel that goes back there to the bypass to the exhaust. So, and then I cut some thin brick veneers to go over the top of that little fiberboard to create the illusion of a solid brick perimeter. There's a little bit more detail on how the glass top will set in there, and there's a little shot of the bypass. Again, I'll go over that in some detail in a later video. But that's the end of it. That's the brickwork. And then I just went ahead and set that in the same clay sand mortar. And as it heats up, it expands and cracks, and you'll set it a few times once it's warm. After a while, though, it should stay fairly crack-free and definitely will be sealed well enough. Okay, thanks for watching.